All right, it looks like we have enough people logging in. Well, hopefully they can play catch up here as we get going. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. Hi everyone, my name is Diana Everline, VP of Marketing at SōRSE Technology. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, first webinar of the year, 5 things to know when evaluating a water-soluble CBD emulsion. We were hoping by now that we'd be able to get back to in-person events and meetings, and no one misses trade shows more than today's presenter. We can't wait to get back to BevNet and SupplySide West as well as many other events. But in the meantime, we'll continue hosting educational sessions to help you get your infused products to market. Most of you have attended our webinars in the past, which is great. Welcome back. Maybe you even attended our virtual summit last year where over 15 of our thought leaders presented. And if that's the case, you probably are familiar with our VP of Technical Business Development, Michael Flemmens. He presented not once but twice during that summit, but he's also been often featured on BevNet and a number of other platforms for his experience in the food and bev space. Michael has worked on a patented new cancer treatment, had a type 4 drug master file approved by the FDA, and received a JECFA approval for our new food ingredients. But today, all we really care about is one thing. He's the guy that figures out how to put CBD in your product, and he's going to tell you how to evaluate all these emulsions that you see on the market today. But before we get going, a couple rules of engagement, if you will. This webinar will be recorded, and it will be sent out following the webinar and presentation tomorrow to all that have registered. You also get a copy of the presentation as well. Throughout the presentation, there will be a number of demonstrations of our water-soluble solutions. If you're interested in receiving a sample at any time for your own evaluation, email us at info@sorsetech.com, or anytime you can message me directly through the chat feature. And last but not least, to be most efficient with time and make sure we cover everything, we ask that you submit your questions via the chat box at the bottom of the screen. We will address as many questions as we can following the presentation during the Q&A portion. Any questions we don't get to, we will follow up directly via email to answer your question, and perhaps those will be answered in future Powered by SōRSE webinars. On that note, that's it. I'll let you take it away, Michael.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and we'll kick it off here. That's me. I absolutely hate this headshot, but most of you are familiar with my face. If you're not, you're probably better off for not having to deal with me too much. But we'll go ahead and get right into the content. Diana, it is freezing on my side, so we'll just have to have you change. Thank you. Just a skosh about emulsion technology. For those of you that are not familiar, an emulsion is simply essentially a transformation and then subsequent dispersion of minute droplets, typically one liquid into another, that are not traditionally soluble. The classic example is oil and water. Oil does not like to go into water, so we transform the oil into micelles. It's a form of emulsion that can be easily dispersed into water. They're not new for product developers. Many people, whether they know it or not, many product developers have used emulsions in one shape or form throughout their careers. Many people are familiar with flavors, but there are traditionally a number of different emulsified products on the market. Go to the next one, please. And then we have a quick poll. We're just trying to get a sense of who's here and how many things you may have played with before. So we'll give everybody a few minutes to answer the question, and then we'll move on.
All right, I'll jump in here with the poll results. It looks like about 63% of you have evaluated 0 to 3, while 13% have evaluated over 10 emulsions. making you guys pretty well versed in the emulsion space. There's also about 18% that fall in the middle there between 4 and 6. So really great to see that we have a wide variety of people with experience in this space.
Great. It makes things a lot easier. We'll go through the second poll question now. Just trying to get a sense of what people are trying to produce or get a handle on, or maybe it's the next evolution or brand extension, but just trying to get an idea of what people are currently working on right now.
The numbers are still coming in here, but it looks like we're around 45% ready to drink beverages, 18% edible, 11% topical, 18% other personal care item and nutraceutical, and 9% ready to mix beverage. So we have a good mix across the board there. So we'll close out that poll.
Okay, so now that we know everybody's working on a little bit something, hopefully we'll be able to help everybody out and touch on most of the topics. And if there's something specific that you want or need assistance on that we don't touch on, please put a question in the chat and we'll hope to address it at the end. So it is science, it is water soluble, emulsions are water soluble, we make them water soluble, but there are some hurdles associated specifically with cannabinoids and different techniques. Obviously, the first and foremost is that there are some negative sensory attributes associated with cannabinoids, and it really depends on your target audience. Some people want their beverage to taste like the flavor that's on the label and not anything else. And some people actually go looking for products that have a very cannabis-like taste and smell. But for a large percentage of the people that we work with, they do their best to mitigate the sensory attributes of the cannabinoids. Sometimes products where you're trying to have dissimilar materials in the same beverage, you have interesting or deleterious shelf life. These materials, by their very nature, do not want to stay in phase, and it's SōRSE's job and the product developer's job to use combinations of products that do give you the best shelf life that you can have. Homogeneity is a big attribute, traditionally not associated with standard flavored beverages, because you tend not to notice any small discrepancy in flavor profile from the first sip to the last sip. But when you're in a regulated market that involves cannabinoids and you're going to be held to meeting a label claim of 19 milligrams or 25 milligrams, whatever's in the beverage, you want to assure that that cannabinoid is uniformly dispersed throughout the entire beverage, because the analytical lab is only going to take a small sample. They're not going to inject the entire product into the analytical equipment. It's a very small sample size. So that small sample size needs to be incredibly representative of the overall product as a whole. And so making sure that you have a high degree of homogeneity in the sample is critical, especially when you're looking at analytical results and label claims. Scalping for most people is not a relatively new term, but if you are, it is new. Scalping is a phenomenon where certain materials tend to have an affinity for the container they're in. We tend not to see a great deal of scalping in plastic or glass, but in cans for carbonated or still beverages, the liners that are on the inside of the cans do unfortunately have an affinity for specific compounds. Those can be terpenes that are associated with flavors. And that's really the root of understanding the issue. Was it came about in the beer industry, where the terpenes that are in the hops used to flavor the beer ended up having affinity for the can liner, and the taste of the beer changed over time. We see the same results in cannabinoids, where terpenes and cannabinoids can have an affinity for the can liner. It doesn't mean that they go anywhere. It doesn't mean that they're not there and not present. It simply means they're stuck to the inside of the can liner. And that does have an impact on analytical assays. So something we need to pay great attention to. And then a lot of challenges we see with different types of emulsified products or additives in general is a challenge in creating scale. So many product developers are starting out, they're looking for small quantities of material, proof of concept, small canning runs or bottling runs or production runs. And then they want to know that as their business grows and as their production grows, that the material that's being added to their product will scale with them. And that's a very important attribute when you're looking at any sort of supply stream. It's good for a product developer to know, what are my scale options? Can you provide me this material as my business hopefully grows and scales? So all good attributes. If you get to the next one, Diane. So when we look at product development as a whole, there are a number of predetermined goals that the product developer either will come to on their own or goals that are given to them by whoever is tasked them with product development. While not all encompassing, these are some of the primary drivers that we see and seem to be consistent on a product by product basis. Flavor profile obviously is very important. So when we engage with a customer, we like to know, what flavor profiles are you going for? Are you going for a very clean finish where you want the flavor of your beverage to shine through, or do you want to incorporate the cannabinoid taste? Because that will help guide us into what specific stream of material we emulsify. And the same could be said for those in the topical sense. Just remove flavor and put aroma in there. Do you want your topical product to smell green and grassy and have those green notes, resinous notes associated with cannabinoids? Or do you want it to smell like lavender or some other fragrance? The effect, there's a lot of materials out there that talk about the entourage effect, which is the enhancement of a combination of different cannabinoids where the old equation 1 + 1 = 3. So does the combination of CBD and CBN enhance the CBN? Does a small trace amount in the legal states that use cannabis, does THC in combination with CBD or other cannabinoids enhance the effect? So are you looking for just CBD and CBD label claim, or are you looking for combination effects? Dosage is also a big key. Assuming that you have a standard package size, obviously the sensory effects and the scalping effects associated with a smaller milligram dose, say like 10 milligrams, are different than what you would expect in a larger sample size, like a 50 milligram beverage. The degree of scalping and the homogeneity associated with products and the sensory are all driven in part by this dosage that we're trying to hit. There are also some other interesting attributes that most people are pretty aware of if you're trying to hit specific market claims. Are you looking for organic? Are you looking for kosher? All these things are important attributes of the product that are good to communicate up front so that we can help select the best product fit for your ultimate goals. And then, are there going to be any additional production needs and additional support for folks that are fairly well seasoned and experienced in the space that they're choosing to play? That in many cases they need very little assistance. If you're a startup and you're not well versed or experienced in production or manufacturing of specific products, how many additional assets do you need to bring to bear in the form of engineering or process authority or looking for co-mans, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of important attributes that you really need to consider prior to or during the initial engagement with any prospective ingredient supplier. Do the next one, Diana.
I think we're going to do a demo real quick.
We're going to do a demo really quick of a couple hazy products. So in this instance, I'm going to do first a isolate-based hazy product and then a broad spectrum-based hazy product. They're going to look the same on the camera, hopefully, and without the benefit of having smell-o-vision, you won't be able to tell that one's an isolate-based or broad spectrum. Where this comes into play is that we still don't know where the FDA is going to land as far as specifying any particular input stream of products, whether it's broad, isolate, or a combination of. But when you look at products, you'll see that the products look the same. And that's important from a marketing perspective, because if you're going to launch a product and you do launch a product, and eventually the FDA comes in and says, nope, we want you to change to this input stream. And you're like, oh no, I've wasted all my time and effort. You're like, nope, we can make, well, it may not taste the same. And so there might be some formulation work that will look the same, which is an important part of marketing. So first we'll start off, this is our isolate based. So the power of emulsions means that I can drop this cannabinoid into water. Many of you have seen demos like this before. Very easy to disperse, very little agitation mixing needed, and you're finished. That's as easy as you can get to making a product. Now, if we want to convert to a broad spectrum product, we'll take essentially the same material, add it just like we did for the isolate based, and then I give that a swirl, and now we've got the product. Same product, so we've gone from an isolate to a broad spectrum. They still look the same, which is great, because if we have to switch down, or you want to do a brand extension or a line extension, you can still have exactly the same looking material with very different outcomes and sensory attributes. Right there. So when we talk about sensory, taste, texture, smell, aroma, it's kind of a long-standing tradition in the food and beverage industry. It doesn't take someone a tremendous amount of experience in the industry to know that if you put something in front of someone, and if it doesn't smell good, they're very likely not going to try and taste it. There's a select few of us that are interesting in why a specific off-sensory or aroma characteristics and how that tastes, but for the most part, the consumers, if you put a product in front of them that doesn't smell good, they're very likely not to taste it. And subsequently, if it then doesn't taste good, it probably isn't going to sell, or you're not going to get repeat business. So it's really important to make sure that even though certain market claims or certain health and wellness claims you're shooting for, it's always good to make sure that you marry up the concept of what it is you're trying to achieve to, am I creating a product that has a high likelihood of commercial success? And the same goes through to the personal care market, whether you're doing topicals or health and beauty products. If the sensory is not good, if it doesn't feel good on the skin, people aren't going to buy it and they're not going to use it. So we still, even though we're developing a new product inside a cannabinoid space, we still want to make sure that we hit the same metrics and milestones and parameters that the rest of the product development companies do. Sensory, quite arguably, is one of the most important aspects of the product, and it's very important to pay attention to that sensory. Go to the next one there. Along with sensory, certificates, types of products, and this goes in lockstep with some of the marketing aspects or some of the constraints that are put upon the product developer. They may be told that they are going to be making an all organic product or an all natural product or a kosher product, and all of those different specifics have a requirement that the ingredient supplier has to make. So it, in part, does play a role in the sensory. While yes, we want a clean tasting product, but if it has to be 100% organic and it has to be 100% all natural, then that may carry with it some undesirable attributes. So none of these things are independent. It's important that we make sure that we understand how all of the different variables fit in together. Specifically, is it going to have an impact on shelf life or cost? Unpreserved systems, as you know, have different manufacturing requirements potentially than preserved systems. So that goes to cost to manufacture or timeline or shelf life of a product. Having to certify organic or kosher is in many cases a little bit more expensive. So that does carry with it some cost constraints. So it's always important to understand some of the variables associated with the ask. Thanks.
I think you have one more demo you're going to do here.
Yep, we were going to do the clear. So for those of you who haven't seen the clear, the hazy is one. When we talk about different attributes, one of the marketing constraints, just like kosher organic, would be, is this going to be a hazy product or a clear product? I think we've all understand that growing up, like Gatorade was hazy. Good luck finding a clear milk. There are many instances where hazy products are acceptable in the marketplace, but there are some that if you want to do a brand extension or conform to an existing brand, you're looking for a clear. And in this case, what we've developed is simply a clear emulsion. So unlike the hazy, it's almost hard to see go in. But if I give it a little mix, you're still maintaining a clear beverage that could be consistent with brand or consistent with the attributes that you're required to hit. And in contrast with the hazy, you'll see they're effectively dosed about the same. They carry about the same milligrams of CBD cannabinoids in them. They're going to have a relatively low, if this is isolate and isolate, they're going to have a very low sensory attribute. Essentially, the only difference is the clarity. But still a product, still something that's important to understand and talk about with your supplier and understand during the product needs and when you're requesting samples. When we talk about shelf life, this is a really big, interesting topic in the cannabinoids market. In part, it's multifaceted. It's hard to think about things in shelf life from a normal perspective, where we're looking for a loss of flavor or a loss of efficacy, or when we expect spoilage. But when we talk about cannabinoids, we also throw in this interesting new dynamic about of scalping. So if we're in cans, the shelf life, the apparent shelf life, could be driven more so by the scalping effect than necessarily any other degradatory pathway or spoilage pathway out there. So sometimes when we have aspirations for specific shelf lives that are in many cases challenging, it doesn't have anything necessarily to do with the underlying fundamentals of formulation. It's driven by some other mechanism. So when we talk about scalping in cans, but an interesting thing that people pay attention to is that cannabinoids are many times sensitive to UV. So there is an isomeric shift. Sometimes using UV light is the kinetics or the catalyst behind transforming CBD into one of the other isomers. It may change or isomerize into CBG or CBA or CBN, depending on the pathway. And many times, unfortunately, these pathways are driven or catalyzed by the exact formula that they're putting it in. So the same product in a low pH juice beverage will act differently than the equivalent product in a more alkaline-based sparkling beverage that doesn't have fruit and sugars. So trying to understand shelf life in the cannabinoid space is a very challenging thing. And it's even more challenging when you look at, you're trying to do an assay. So if you put 20 milligrams of CBD in there and they isomerize and say now you're 19% CBD, but that 1% is isomerized into, so let's just say it's CBN and CBG. Now you're beholden on your analytical lab to have limits of detection that can find, and limits of quantification that can find those isomers. In many cases, that becomes challenging because you're also talking about a fairly dilute system. Most people aren't putting 500 milligrams in a beverage. So you're looking at a very small percentage of cannabinoids in general. And then you're looking for an incredibly smaller subset of isomers that have changed. So when it comes to regulatory and the FDA and shelf life is a very real concern. And it's a very, very challenging thing for most people on the market. It doesn't necessarily mean that the customer's not getting a great product or an efficacious product. It's just now challenging to hit label claims. But when you do look at different supplies, you do want to make sure that you're getting as much shelf life as you can. And that there needs to be some corollary between the documentation, the C of A's you receive, the label claims you're making, and then the assay results you're getting from the analytical testing facility. It's many cases challenging to circumvent all of these things and understand how they're all closely related and tied in together. But we can tell you that, you know, certain products that SōRSE manufacturers and other people make do have decent shelf life. SōRSE tends to have a shelf life that's in excess of what most people are looking for. But since it's formulation dependent, each customer, each particular product manufacturer is going to need to do some level of shelf life testing on their own unique products. So when you look at like stability testing, and this kind of gets back into that, the last segment, is they're all tied together. So you have stability of the product itself, you have stability of the formulation, you have the homogeneity of the finished product, and then how those all impact by not only the formulation, but also the manufacturing cycle. So are you having any variation in blending? Are you having any variation in dosing when you're manufacturing product? All of these things are incredibly interrelated, and it's not as simple as if someone makes a small mistake in a batch tank with a flavor or a sugar or a color. Most consumers are not sending out their product for caloric content. They're not no one's making a label claim that this product contains, 12 milligrams of caffeine or 12 milligrams of sugar. It's an approximate. But in the cannabinoid space, we are beholden to hitting label claims. So understanding all the intricacies and how all the combined effects of production and brand and formulation and manufacturing tie into this overarching thing that we're going to call stability is a very challenging and complex issue that many people have challenges with. And it is a little bit different than your standard production. Most people don't notice subtle variations in flavors of beverages, but you will find variations in testing when you send products out for analytical assay. Even from lot to lot and run to run, and especially challenging in the cannabinoid space is that the analytical labs themselves sometimes have a decent degree of variation, even testing the same product. So understanding the complexity and the interconnectedness of all of these things is paramount when you're working with cannabinoids. Next one, Diana.
All right. I believe we were going to do the powder demo now too as well.
So to hit on to the ready to mix platform, or for, in some cases, topicals or baked goods, besides the liquid products, a powdered product is really a great way to go. For a number of different reasons: shelf life, consistency, portability, logistics. No one wants to ship water if they don't have to. It's much easier to ship powder. So this is a small aliquot of agglomerated powder, and the power in this is the fact that the hydration rate is incredibly fast. So people that are making RTM products traditionally have issues with hydration times and needing to stir and agitate. But the product was designed specifically for the very fast hydration. So hopefully you'll see the agglomerated product is literally already starting to rehydrate right before our eyes. The hydration time of this agglomerated powder is actually faster than sugar or salt, to put it in perspective. So in a matter of just a few seconds, with very little mixing, we're essentially going to have a finished product. If anybody's ever tried this with Crystal Light at home, you'll know that it takes a little bit more time to solubilize and hydrate. But I will say, like, I know that RTM products, while not being the mainstream, have an incredible, I think they're underserved in the community, underserved in product development efforts that we see, especially in cannabinoids. We're now getting product into the mainstream, and people have taken cannabinoids and adopted it as part of their daily regimen, and it's part of their lifestyle now. So when you have challenges of portability, you go on vacation. Do you take with you? Do you pack or check a case of your favorite CBD products? Can you find your favorite CBD products or the ones you use religiously in the market that you're going to? Would it be easier to take a concentrated version along? So I think there's a tremendous upside or a tremendous ability to do a brand extensions by using powdered assets or concentrated assets in many of the systems. And when we finally want to close the loop, we're all in the food and beverage industry, so quality is king or queen. Making sure that you have the highest grade starting materials, and that goes back all the way back to the plant, the best hemp, the highest quality extracts, all the subsequent manufacturing and testing that goes along with receiving an input material. Safe ingredients, absolutely 100% a requirement. Making sure that your supplier has a great quality system. If you ask suppliers for PDSs, SDSs, C of A's, Prop 65 statements, sewage and sludge statements, you don't want a blank stare coming back at you. Many cases, especially as these products migrate towards FDA or regulatory stance, having all of the associated quality systems, the quality documentation, is your potential supplier. Are they going to survive an audit from not only you, but any regulatory body that may choose it? Most people are unfamiliar that even though if you pass an FDA audit, if you use a material and that is disclosed during the audit process, which almost all raw materials are, the FDA also has the ability to go to all your raw material suppliers and audit them. So just making sure that you can have all that downstream auditing and you feel comfortable from a quality perspective, not only that you are making a safe product for your consumers, but you will survive some regulatory scrutiny is incredibly important. And then to marry that up with third-party testing, don't take the supplier's word for it. Make sure that you're independently validating any particular results that you're getting or any particular statements that you're making. Test it for micro, test it for assay, test it to what's important for you. And it's great. You should have documentation from any prospective supplier about that, but it's also you have to do due diligence as a product developer and make sure that you're independently verifying that information. When we talk about quality, quality is one thing for a product developer. It's another thing for an internal quality person at a corporation. It means something different to regulatory. But when we talk about quality for the consumer, what does that mean? I mean, the hope is that as consumers, we trust our providers that they've done their due diligence and they haven't put a can of poison or a can of something with microbial growth inside of it on the grocery store shelves. But the consumer is looking at quality as far as appearance and taste and consistency. Those are the things that, in many cases, when we talk about quality consumer facing, it's very different than quality from production or as the brand owner. It goes all the way from the first line of sight at the grocery store, like what does your packaging look like? Who does it draw into? Is it differentiating? Does it convey the story? packaging is an incredibly important piece of that. And again, when we talk about things like scalping, if you choose to use cans and packaging is part of your brand, and that's what you're going to go with, then you have to be aware that scalping could come in. If you're looking at doing glass, you have to be cognizant that UV has an impact. So if you use glass or clear plastic, maybe you want a full wrap label, or you want an amber vial to mitigate some of the effects of UV. But like I said, glass and PET tend not to scalp, but if they are clear, they tend to have other adverse conditions in regards to UV. The folks that use cans don't necessarily have to worry about UV. Now they have to worry about scalping. So it's important to understand and convey information early on during the development process with any potential supplier or co-man, especially in regards to, here's where I'm going. I'm going in cans. Okay, well, these are the things we need to pay attention to. Or when I'm looking at a co-man and using them for my scale-up efforts, can I scale up production outside of that co-man? Can that co-man grow with me? Or if I use a uniquely shaped bottle at a smaller co-man, will a larger co-man be able to produce product with that same uniquely shaped product? You don't want to develop products that you can't scale in various other attributes. So there are a lot of small intricacies along with packaging that come to bear when you develop some of these products, and we don't want to be short-sighted and assume that I can run 3,000 a day at this particular co-man and that will suffice for hopefully the growth of my business. But I can only use that co-man because only they have this set up. So it's an important piece that really needs to be discussed upfront with any potential suppliers you may have. And this goes back again, packaging can impact potency. SōRSE has undertaken a collaborative body of work with one of the primary can suppliers in the country so that we can better understand and provide guidance, not only from which raw material we may offer to a prospective client who's going to use cans, but also to help guide them. Cans are not all the same. There are multiple manufacturers of cans, and each manufacturer has multiple grades of cans. And many times the grades of cans are different liners or different thicknesses of liners. And the different liners scalp differently, and the thickness of the lining itself can change the rate of scalping or the degree of scalping. So having an understanding that there are variances within cans are not all the same, and sourcing the appropriate can is very important. Working with the same can time and time again is also something if it's important, because you may find that the first batch of cans perform beautifully and the second batch of cans don't do so well. And now today, this becomes an even bigger challenge given the can shortage that most of the production environments and different companies are faced with. It's hard to find cans. It's hard to find consistent cans. But having the understanding that that is very important cog in the wheel is something that we have to talk about, something we have to address. And then hopefully in the very short term, we will be able to publish this body of work that we've been doing to help guide people and give some guidance as far as types of materials to look for, things to try and hopefully avoid. But stay tuned, that should be coming. But know that many of the negative effects surrounding cans, we can typically find a way to mitigate some of these things. Another thing to look for is when you have this potency loss, and this again comes from a number of different things. It can be that it's pure scalping and the materials are just not there for you to find. But there are additional degradatory pathways that cannabinoids will go through. Some of there's natural loss. And that could be through traditional isomerization of the cannabinoids. Because remember, most people are simply asking the lab to report the CBD percentage. And if you lose a small percentage and it isomerizes into something else, many times the lab can't find that. It doesn't mean that your CBD is going away. It's just converting into something else. And in sufficiently small quantities that you're having a hard time finding it. In some cases, it's a manufacturing loss based on, let's just say that you're doing a traditional beverage run, whether you do a bleed and feed system, whether you do tank mix, or however you're putting your product together, there are mechanisms by which you can have cannabinoid loss. And again, this is not something the traditional co-mans have paid attention to a lot in the past, because most people would be not very aware of a small change in flavor or color or sweetness. But when you're actually trying to hit a label claim and you are certifying to assay results, this becomes a very real problem that outside of the medical and pharmaceutical communities, they haven't become intellectually familiar with. So just something to help work with your manufacturer. But yes, all things that lead to, I didn't get the result that I thought I had in my can. Well, let's peel back the onion. There's probably a number of different things that are going on. There's probably also a number of ways we can help mitigate some of those problems. And then just as a small pro tip, we see in many cases, folks will actually slightly overdose their products to make sure that in case of isomerization, in case of scalping, in case of UV degradation, in case, I want to hit my label claim. While not always the most cost-effective way, it is certainly more cost-effective to hit your label claim than institute a recall because you couldn't hit your label claim. Next one, Diana. And we're talking about scalability. I think we touched a little bit on that before, but can the product scale? Like, can my supplier service me with 500 grams of product, 500 liters of product, 5,000 gallons of product? Just make sure that whatever supply streams you're using, whatever manufacturing you're using, they have the ability to hopefully grow with your business. I don't think anybody's in business to sell as little as possible. We're all in business to hopefully grow our business and grow our output streams. So just make sure that this, not only can the product scale, but as the product scales, does it remain consistent? And part of that is when we showed the example of isolate or broad spectrum, if you have developed a product with one particular variant and the FDA comes down and says, look, we need you to switch, can your supplier switch seamlessly from, say, an isolate to a broad spectrum and still be able to provide you the same product, the same level of product, the same stability, the same shelf life? Those are all important things because, again, we simply don't know where the FDA is going to land, and we have to be prepared, hopefully, to not pivot, but potentially some folks are going to be pivoting a little bit based on any pending FDA regulations. Next one, Diane. And this is something that SōRSE as a company hangs our hat on. We like to make products that are as easy to use as possible for the end user. Most people are familiar like working with different flavor emulsions. We want to find an avenue for introduction into the production process that's analogous with many types of products that are already being used, whether they're flavors or concentrates. So I would say our process of incorporation is really easy. Step one, you dump our product in wherever you want to introduce it. And step two is you're fine. There is no step two. It's simply step one. The material will tend to mix by itself. Most traditional means of mixing final product are more than sufficient to disperse the product. Many manufacturers already have incorporation routes, whether they're fluid or it's an injection stream or simply a weigh and dump. We'll find a way to put it into a standard process with as minimal disruption as possible. And then we'll touch on nano. We get a ton of questions surrounding nano. There are a lot of companies out there touting nano-sized emulsions, nano-sized cannabinoids. And if you look closely at SōRSE and the website and the collaterals and the handouts, we do a very good job of trying to deliberately distance ourselves from the word nano. And there's a couple reasons for that. And I would advocate that you take a little bit of time on the FDA's website, and in the food and beverage section of the FDA, just start Googling nano and do your own research and come up with your own understanding. But what kind of give you the highlights is that traditionally the FDA is not very fond of products that are marketed as nano. Nano is incredibly small, and the FDA is concerned that nano-sized particles can kind of go wherever they want to. There are a lot of mechanisms in the body that preclude things from transporting across certain membranes, while our nano-sized materials have the ability to self-transport through those. So if you use the nano-sized material X, is material X going someplace that you don't want it to go? Is it concentrating somewhere? Is it going to be in any way deleterious to the traditional mechanisms and bioactive systems by being somewhere that it's not? So the FDA typically doesn't like the word, and if they see it, in many cases, not all, but in some cases, they may require additional testing to make sure that the material is only going where it's supposed to be going. So you can obviously understand that if a human is consuming nano-sized particles and the FDA does ask the company to verify that those particles are only going where they should be going, you can imagine there would be a mountain of work that is very costly to prove that it is going where it is only supposed to be going. It's very likely that as the FDA regulates cannabinoid products, they will also then take a look at people that are touting the nano claim. We've already seen structure function label claims being looked at with some level of scrutiny, with some cease and desist letters from the FDA. So it's very likely that we'll also see components. And for those of you that are new to the nano buzzword, I always say that a great rule of thumb is to go to CVS or Walgreens or whatever your local drugstore is and walk through the product aisles and see how many products are actually marketed with that particular word. In many cases, you won't find any. And that's because many of the companies in those regulated spaces understand what it means when you use that word either in product or in marketing. And there is a misnomer in the industry that nano materials are touted as having a bioavailability. No one has actually put concrete evidence, statistically significant data sets showing where a particular particle size of X is better than another particle size. It is just anecdotal touting. In some cases in the pharmaceutical industry, it does lead credence, but they do actually have the data to show they've modified the particle sizes to affect an outcome. So again, there's a lot of hype around it. If you're interested or curious about nano, the SōRSE as a team will simply advocate you do your own research, and there are a lot of potential pitfalls and things out there that you're going to have to pay attention to. And I think it's on the pillars that SōRSE as a company didn't set about just creating a cannabinoid emulsion. We did it on a number of different pillars. And number one, we're sensitive because we're all product developers. We're trying to make food and beverage or topical products. The taste of the aroma is incredibly important. Stability of a product is incredibly important. Consistency, dosing, scale, all of these things are incredible important attributes surrounding any raw material supply stream that you may look at. And the cannabinoid emulsion was built specifically so that we could address all of the major concerns that most raw material or ingredient suppliers use. So you can rest assured, if you're using a SōRSE product, that all of these background things that maybe aren't going to necessarily jump out at a consumer, but should be inherently important to the brand or the manufacturer, they've all been addressed. And that's pretty much everything. And then we'll kick it back to Diana with some questions.
Yeah, we're jumping into the Q&A portion here. We are about 6 minutes from the hour here, and so I know I want to be cognizant of people's time. So first, I do want to remind everyone to continue sending your questions in. We will reply directly to every question that we're not able to answer here today. And also, if you guys want to request a sample for your own evaluation purposes, feel free to shoot us an email at info@sorsetech.com, and you can even send your questions there as well if you'd like. We'll try and get a couple questions out here, for Michael to answer while you guys are still on. We got a lot of questions, guys. This was great. Thank you so much for sending so many. There were a lot about nano, and I think we actually touched on those because those came in a little bit earlier before he got to that. But I did get a specific question about RTD versus RTM, so ready to drink versus ready to mix beverages. Looking for pros and cons to either, and whether you would recommend for ready to mix a liquid or agglomerated powder form for the delivery method.
Sure. I mean, I think the RTD, RTM is a fairly natural brand extension for most people. And a lot of times it just comes to portability. I think we all gravitate to one or more specific products, and we tend to make them part of our routine. So like most people, if you love Diet Coke, it doesn't matter where you go in the country, you can probably find a can or a container of Diet Coke somewhere. In the cannabinoid industry right now, and with logistics being that what they are, it's many times challenging to find your specific brand, or in some places any brand of cannabinoids. So the RTD is great for convenience sake. It looks great in a retail package. But if you go on vacation or you travel or you're at the office, or for a number of mitigating circumstances, an RTM product lends itself to being a perfect thing to travel with, or a perfect on-the-go product. And I think many times it gets overlooked as a great brand extension. It doesn't take up a lot of shelf space, so you're not paying a premium in the grocery store. In many cases, you can put it POS to drive those last-minute sales where someone wasn't thinking about having necessarily a product. But I think it's a very viable platform that not a lot of people have really enhanced or embraced right now, because the mainstream is all about sort of RTD.
Great. I think it's funny that you used Crystal Light in the presentation and now Diet Coke. I feel like you're attacking me for my consumption habits. But couldn't agree more. Consistency is key, and being able to transport those ready to mix products is really nice for on the go, or you can always have it when you need it wherever you are. Consistency, though, I think is the key there as well. Kind of piggybacking off that and talking about underserved markets, you touched on that a little bit throughout the presentation, but are there particular products that you'd like to see on the market that move into the CBD space?
Yeah, I mean, I think when the cannabinoids first sort of entered the market, everybody was in a rush just to get CBD somewhere. As the market is starting to mature and companies are looking to differentiate products, there are a lot of potential combinations with different health and wellness attributes that I think are traditionally underserved right now in the marketplace. Certainly, I'm a strong advocate for pre and post workout protein beverages. I think CBD plays exceptionally well with protein beverages, or sort of that ready to go meal in a container sort of thing. But I think also if you look at things like electrolytes, probiotics, I think there's a natural synergy between many of these compounds that not a lot of people have sort of embraced or have thought about using. But I think they're really great potential combinations and really in an underserved market.
Yeah, and I agree with the electrolytes and kind of combining those different functional ingredients. And that kind of leads into the next question, which will probably be the last one we're able to get to within the hour. But based on current trends and inquiries that we're currently seeing, where do you see the market going in terms of CBD types? Is it isolate, broad spectrum, or these custom formulations? Is it CBD plus something else, kind of what you just touched on? Where do you see the market driving this industry?
Yeah, I think again, we're looking at people trying to differentiate themselves. Like there are a number of companies out there that have some incredible products from a flavor perspective. And so it may be hard for someone just getting into the space to differentiate themselves or go head to head with some of these great products that are already kind of in the market. But doing this customization piece, sort of a boutique approach, and leveraging a lot of the research that's coming out that, it may be a simple CBD beverage, but maybe you make a tailored nighttime beverage, it's CBD, CBN, but then also maybe drawing in some different well-known things like melatonin, or it could be a chamomile flavored base in combination with CBD, CBN. Those are the targeted therapeutics that I think the market is slowly starting to evolve into. It's CBD and caffeine for morning, my fantastic tasting CBD beverage all day long, and then my boutique CBD, CBN, chamomile, melatonin at night for a good night's rest. So I think you're seeing a lot of that start to come to the market, and people are starting to work on a lot of those type of products.
Excellent. Well, that's about all the time we have here. It's 1 o'clock, and we have a number of questions that we know we have to follow up on. And a number of those were actually about scalping, which Michael had touched on quite deeply in the presentation. We do have a study that we've conducted, as Michael mentioned, and you can reach out to us directly, and we can share some of that information with you since we didn't get time to touch on it during the Q&A. So again, that's either send me a message here on the chat or info@sourcetech.com, and we can follow up with you to schedule time to go over it. Thank you guys so much today. Michael, thank you as always for a wonderful presentation. I think we had a lot of people with some takeaways, and we have plenty of questions to follow up with all of you as well. So thank you for attending our first webinar of the year, and we will hopefully see you all again soon. Thank you. Have a good day.